Christmastide is the time of the Incarnation, to speak of our Emmanuel and what it means that God chose to dwell with us as a human person. Before we get to Lent and the primary reason for Christ's coming, we get to spend some time with Jesus as a human teacher and prophet, living among the people. In our Anglican tradition, we have a strong emphasis on the Incarnation and on the humanity of Jesus. Indeed, much Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment thought has centered around the man who is Jesus, and we tend to focus a little bit less on his divinity. From all of this, a question may arise. Did Jesus know that he was God? How aware was Jesus of his own divinity, or are we really just placing something on him that he himself did not believe or think? I heard somebody once say that Jesus was the most surprised of anybody that he was resurrected, and that he had no idea that he was God. And perhaps this is tempting, given that Jesus shows up in very human ways in the Bible, and our text today especially, with Jesus' somewhat rebellious actions and his sarcastic response to his parents. Our story has Jesus and his parents going up for a festival in Jerusalem. In those days, the entire family, likely several hundred people, would have gone together. It wasn't just a nuclear family. So when they leave and don't realize Jesus has stayed behind, it's not like a missing child in a minivan where you look at all the rows and go, oh no, 1 out of 7. No, it's 1 out of like 100. They probably assumed he was just hanging out with one of their aunts or uncles, some of their cousins. But after a day, they realized, oh no, where's Jesus? Where's my son? And they rush back to Jerusalem and find him 3 days later. And maybe you would think, a young 12-year-old, he's probably going to be hanging out with, maybe he snuck into the pub. Maybe he's hanging around with, like, some street kids. No, he's in the temple courts, talking with the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Very normal behavior for a teenager. And on one level, it is a very normal thing for a teenager or a young kid to do something like this, but there's also something a bit odd in his response to his parents. Didn't you know that I would be in my Father's house? We're told that they had no idea what was happening or what he meant. Now, I find a lot of people, at least in my seminary, wanted to talk about how funny and sarcastic Jesus was being here. And I think on some level, yeah, he is being a 12-year-old. It is funny. But it's also not something a 12-year-old would say. There are two things that I want us to notice in this text. First of all, Jesus is asking questions of the teachers, and we're told that they're surprised by his understanding. It's tempting to think that Jesus asking questions means he doesn't know what's going on, that he wants to understand more of the law and to learn. But one of the things that I've learned, especially through my seminary education and outside of it, is that good questions are almost better than good answers sometimes. Jesus' understanding is shown in his questions. The adult Jesus does this a lot, and he has many famous questions, but perhaps greatest of all is when he asks the disciples, "And who do you say that I am?" in response to the rumors that he might be some sort of prophet. Good questions reveal understanding very, very well. Jesus has an understanding of the law that outshines his education, which we must remember is not like ours. He didn't have, K to 6, K to 12. He didn't have the internet to Google stuff if he was curious. He would have had to ask a teacher or his parents. And their education may not have been great. He is not a person that should have this level of education. He's living in Nazareth, which is not exactly a bustling metropolis. So when the teachers see this boy come from a small town and stump them with questions, amaze them with questions, it's not necessarily just the content of the questions, but also who they're coming from. It's shocking because he shouldn't have this knowledge, and yet he does. But perhaps Jesus is just a genius. He's just a really smart kid who really understands the law and the prophets. And that's maybe what the scribes were thinking. But his response to his parents is telling. Jesus asks them, Again, didn't you know I would be in my Father's house? Jesus has an understanding that the temple is the house of his Father, and not Joseph. It isn't just that he wanted to test his intellectual mettle with the teachers, but he wanted to do what Jesus does best, that is, to reveal himself, even slightly. At the beginning, I asked the question if Jesus knew he was divine. And there are many texts other than this that point to Jesus' divinity. This is just one of them. But his language is really important because here we have some of the blocks from which we, the church, have built the doctrine of the Trinity. Jesus, who is the Son, reveals his relationship with God the Father. Indeed, it should not be shocking that Jesus knew he was God when he is baptized a little later, and the Father booms from heaven, and the Spirit alights upon him, and it's this incredible moment. Jesus is pretty chill about the whole thing, and everybody else is surprised. Because this isn't news to Jesus. God the Son does not need to know, because he already does. But hold on. The line right at the end appears to contradict everything I'm saying. It reads that Jesus grew in wisdom, and in some translations, grew in knowledge. Can God grow in knowledge and wisdom? We must enter the realm of mystery here, where we begin to speak of Jesus, the Incarnation, with his human and divine natures. I'm going to take a page out of Brandon's book and ask the old question. Does anybody know the theological word for the mixing of Jesus' two natures? No? No one's a nerd like me? That's okay. It's the hypostatic union. That's okay. The hypostatic union is a word that it's just the union of Jesus' two hypostases, his two natures. So his divine and human ones coming together. So Jesus has a divine and human nature. It's why we talk about God putting on humanity. But this means that Jesus also has a human and a divine intellect. When we say that Jesus grew in wisdom, we are speaking of his human intellect, not his divine one. So Jesus learns insofar as he takes in knowledge and wisdom in a new way, but God does not gain anything new, just knowledge in a new way, or a different way. It's tempting to talk about Jesus in purely human terms. It makes him more relatable. And isn't that what we want? A relatable Jesus? A Jesus just like you, like me? Now, before I keep going, I do think Jesus is relatable. He is a person like us. He suffers and weeps, and he feels emotions. He feasts with us and laughs with us. But if we say that Jesus knew all things through his divine intellect, does that not make Jesus less human if he knew everything? But that is to make a mistake. It's to mistake our broken nature with the whole and perfect one. We often say that to err is to be human. But that is to forget that our human experience is actually not the way that humanity is meant to live. Human nature is not to be ignorant. Jesus is perfectly human because he knows God and sees God fully. To be human is to look upon God as a child looks upon their parent. Before the fall, this is what defines the relationship of humanity with God, to look upon God as his images and be in right relationship. Ecclesiastes 12, the whole duty of humanity is to fear God and keep his laws. The tragedy of the fall is that we no longer get to do this. Jesus' whole mission is to repair this broken relationship, that we may know God and look upon him, that we may not be ignorant of our parentage and our source. No, to insist upon an ignorant Jesus is to insist upon a less human Jesus. It is to bring Jesus down to our level instead of allowing him to raise us to his, and to commit to the ancient heresy of Arianism to make Jesus a mere creature, just like us. Indeed, sin has made us less than human, not more. We think that ignorance is knowledge and sin freedom. This is why when we look upon the sinless, all-knowing Jesus, we see somebody who makes us uncomfortable, someone we see as less than human, but he is actually the true human. Jesus' mission is not to be relatable, but to reveal. Not to be exactly like us, but to call us to something more, a more true human experience. Jesus reveals God to us that we may know all things in and through him. We do not see properly and we do not know properly. But through Christ we may have true knowledge and insight. May we all grow in wisdom and favor with God, led by the boy Jesus, and may our hearts and minds be as his, in line with the will and the love